Streaming live around the world, this is Paper Cuts with Brad and Jay.
I'm the one you love. I'm Jay. Thanks so much for stopping by. So there's Brad. It's his show.
It's his show. That's why I'm the host, and we just love Jay.
Like, I don't know if I'm just dumbfounded, amazed, shocked, or what. God, you just suck the life out of me. It feels like
you've got a lot grayer since we started this.
I have. I know. I have. Tonight, it's the Scratching the Flint release party with Vern Smith and special guests.
We are live.
Hey, that's my cue. What's up, everyone? What better place to be on a Friday evening than with your pals here at Paper Cuts? And we have a house full this evening. Usually, a full house. Usually, Brad and I, we have to sweet talk people and persuade people and blackmail people to come on the show for us, so we could have a little bit of a schedule. But
don't give our secrets away, Jay. Don't give everybody our secrets.
I'm building it up for a reason because
I'm
going to use the word honor and privilege, because it is an honor when someone reaches out to us, says, "Hey, Brad, hey, Jay, do you want to do a little book release party?" And we're like, okay. What else are we going to do? we need people to come on. So that's what we're doing this evening. We have a huge release. Tomorrow is the official release day for Scratching the Flint. It enters the world from Run Amok, and our special guest right now, Vern Smith. That's who's joining us. He brought a lot of people with him too. So Vern, what's going on, buddy? Why don't you go around the room and introduce all your gang here to us?
All right. Well, we already know Brad and Jay. This is
no one cares about us though. It's all about you.
You guys already had a lot of airtime at the beginning there. So at my left, anyways, is A.B. Patterson, the great Australian crime writer, and you need to check out his Harry Kenmar novels as well as his short story collection, Harry Kenmar, and I just read the short story collection. Harry Kenmar, PI at Your Service, was fabulous. I gave that 5 stars on Goodreads. We have in the middle here Gary Anderson, who's the managing editor of Run Amok Books, and I've been publishing with Gary and Run Amok for the last 5 years, and So he's there in the middle. Joey R. Poole at the end, and Joey is he's the editor of Swamp, the horror anthology, and he's also the author of a fabulous short story collection. I have always been here before, and at different points in the development of Scratching the Flint, both AB and Joey were incredibly valuable to me in terms of me running to them crying and getting a little bit of help. And I think we'll be getting into that tonight, but there is the round table.
There's the crew, there's the gang, and we're all here to celebrate the actual release of Scratching the Flint, which is, like I said earlier, entering the world tomorrow. So what better time to celebrate than the night before, so we can all get smashed and sleep in.
We're being responsible, Jay. We're being responsible.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you go ahead, be responsible. Go ahead.
Well,
I think I'm the only non-drinker tonight, too, by the way. I have water. Everyone else has some.
You counseled me to drink.
I was trying to get you to. I mean, we figured more beer, the better.
I see how this is going now.
It was a trap. So
Vern, how long is Scratching the Flint been in the works? Is that something you started writing a few years ago, or something you put out pretty quick?
Oh, it's a very, very long time. So actually, all my novels, The Green Ghetto, Under the Table, and Scratching the Flint, are collaborations between my younger self, something I started in my 30s, and something I finished in my 50s. I got an opportunity. I was working on The Green Ghetto when I got this job opportunity to work at my hometown public radio station. And I had it on my screen when they called up and offered me the job. And I thought, geez, I'm never going to finish this, right? Yeah. And so between 2010 and 2016, I really didn't write at all. I thought when I took this job that I was going to be able to write at night and on weekends. And, in my naivete, the job turned out to be 24/7, 365. And, all the crazy dookie that goes on at a public radio station with more than 100 volunteers. And so, so I was sort of interrupted there. And then when I moved here to the States, I got back into things, finished The Green Ghetto, finished Under the Table. Scratching the Flint I'd completely forgotten about it. And I found it when we were putting out my short story collection, The Gimmick. And it was a 27,000 word novella or novelette. I think that's a novella, but whatever, it doesn't matter. And so when I was piecing together the collection, I looked at it and I could have included it. It was something I'd never done before. It was originally written as a mystery, and I don't write mysteries. I write crime fiction. And I pulled it out of the box and I vaguely recalled it, and I read the first chapter. And you those of you who've read the book, you will recall the reference to write in Dick Gregory for president. And I said, okay, it's a good first chapter, but this all has to be a thread. And so let's read it. And I read it all the way through, and I was happy with it. It hung together, but I did feel that it had the potential to be a full-length novel. And so it was, as soon as I finished Under the Table, I was at work on it. And the interesting thing about this is The Green Ghetto and Under the Table were more editing jobs, where this was an actual writing job. And like I said, I decided to turn it into a crime fiction novel as opposed to a mystery, and develop the criminal characters a little bit more, seeing that it wasn't a mystery. And so, so this was something that was started roughly in the time that it was set. And I obviously pulled it out of my short story collection and developed it further. And so it would have been started approximately 2001, and I finished it in 2020, I believe.
Wow.
It was my lockdown project, and as grim as that time and place was, it was sort of better than the here and now. And so I was able, to escape every day into a world that was 4 or 5 months before 9/11. And as I say, 9/11 wasn't an end of innocence; it was an end of perceived influence. But still, you can go back there with some blinders on and stopped watching the news and just, for 6 or 8 months, just hunkered down and had fun with my characters, drank with them at night, and that's a big part of the process with all of them. And it came together. Actually, I shouldn't say it came together quite quickly once I got in on it, but it was about 6 or 8 months work, and I'm pleased the way it turned out. And I think really one of the things about it is my younger self had the wherewithal to document a lot of this, what was going on, what Toronto looked like in that time and place. And, I think I lacked a certain amount of finesse at that point. I think I was still, to a certain extent, learning and reaching out for help and things like that. And my older self, I'm not having the same wild experiences I had, when I was living in downtown Toronto in my 20s and 30s. And so, my older self was able to, settle things down, and I think bring a finesse into it. And this is my third novel, and they've all been sort of switch hitting plots: A story, B story, A story, B story, until the two intersect. And I by the time I got to Scratching the Flint, I was a lot more competent, I think, in terms of doing that. And so here we are. It's 20 years later, and it's been a long road, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Now, Gary, when he brought you Scratching the Flint, where you're like, well, damn, it's about time. Have you been waiting for this for 20 years? What was the process with getting it to you and getting it out into the public?
Well, I haven't known Vern for 20 years, so
When he said this is 20 years in the making, did you say this better be damn good?
Better be.
Well, it was, yeah. I don't actually remember the precise moment that he dropped it on me, but I was always I'd always said to him, whatever you got, I want to see it. So I think he just showed it to me one day, and I started reading it, and I've of course I'm a fan because I have published his other novels and his short stories, so I was not disappointed at all. I think it's probably, and Vern probably would agree, I think it's the strongest one yet. So very happy to have been able to publish it for him.
Now, people who've got a copy of the gimmick, they're going to see Alex and Cecil appear in Scratching the Flint, right? So they started out in the gimmick, right, Vern?
Yes.
Yes. So was it always your intention to just continue those two characters? Are we going to see like a whole Vern Smith universe of those characters going doing whatever? More books to come from them?
Well, the first one I wrote, the gimmick is the first story I wrote in that sort of cycle of these characters, and there are 3 stories in a novel. And the gimmick I flat out wrote over 6 weeks, basically, working every morning, early in the morning until lunch every day, and submitted it to an anthology on the now defunct Insomniac Press label. And it got in the anthology, and it was shortlisted for an Arthur Ellis Award. And I thought, well, gee, maybe I'm going to make a franchise out of these guys. And so I wrote a couple other stories and developed the characters. They're also in the gimmick. There's another story, an international incident, which is set on a Cuban beach. And Cecil, we talk about Cecil, but he's not actually in the story. But the other main protagonist in that story is Sandra, Alex's girlfriend. And so through that story and through the gimmick, I developed some characters that we poured into Scratching the Flint, and certainly that was valuable in terms of having some three-dimensional people to work with. But it just, like I said, I got that radio job and, put everything in boxes and moved back to Windsor. Right. And so it's really interesting revisiting these characters that I developed and, to a certain extent met 20 years ago, and now dealing with them in my 50s. I can remember coming across the characters that became Alex and Cecil. I was covering a lot of police matters for I Magazine at the time in Toronto, and I'd gone to a press conference at police headquarters, and there was a diner attached to it, which is in Scratching the Flint, called Fran's. And after the press conference, I went over to Fran's for a coffee and to go over my notes, and I picked up some press releases. And there were these 2 men. Fran's is basically attached to police headquarters in Toronto. And there were these 2 men at the next table over from me. And there was a senior black officer that I took as a detective. And, there was this young, mouthy white guy who I also took as a police officer of some sort. And he became Cecil. And what I can remember, I don't remember any specific conversation between them, but I can remember the younger officer being shockingly disrespectful. And, so Cecil became, Alex and Cecil sort of grew out of that. And then, I think it was 2003, we went to Cuba for a holiday, and I'm sure the Alex character was there at the same resort as us, and and so I remember sort of following him down to the beach with his girlfriend, and sitting near them, and this incident unfolded, and I basically for the most part simply recorded what was going on, and that became a piece of autobiographical fiction. So I'm pretty familiar with them through these experiences, and they're at this point, I'm not really a sequel guy, but I could see working them into something else, down the road in the future. Maybe playing a minor part, and if I ever did anything on a grander scale, I think I would have to go into the here and now, because it would be it's a tough thing to write historical fiction. And the reason I'm able to do it is because I was basically doing it back in the day when I was creating all this stuff. And like I said, I think it's best that I'm finishing them up now, because I think they're all much deeper and more competent books.
Right.
It's interesting. You were talking about earlier, there's like a 20-year gap from when you started to when you finished it. Do you feel like there's a difference in the writing from, the earlier parts of it when you started as a younger person, as opposed to, when you finished it up, 20 years later? Do you think you can tell, like, this is where the old part started, this is the new part started?
Well, I can tell in terms of the writing and the finesse. And, I think I was a little bit more of a blunt object, if you will, when I was a kid. And, you have that 6 years off when I was working in radio. I wasn't writing fiction, but everything around a radio station revolves around writing letters, writing notes, writing briefing things, things like that. And I always said that nothing made me a better writer than writing disciplinary letters, because there's no place to hide. There's utterly no place to hide, and they have to be perfect, particularly in this day and age. And so when I opened up The Green Ghetto and finished that, I think in 2017, I did feel a higher competence. I felt things were much more fluid in terms of me going in and operating, if you will. And it really comes down to the young person had the experience and observations, and old man Smith had to come in and clean everything up, and so that's basically how it worked. And it's actually, to me, it's very idyllic. I mean, I look at my first book, Glue for Breakfast, which was published in 1996, and I self-deprecatingly refer to it as my disco album, because and there are good stories in there, but I can see the unevenness, and I can see a certain rigidness, and sort of basically, I don't want to say ham-handed, but it's not smooth, it's not fluid like I think I am now. And so certainly I got older and I got better, and I bow at the altar of the artifact, and I think these are better artifacts for me having gone through the process that I did. I'm a Gen Xer, and we tend to have a lot of careers as opposed to the people who came before us, and basically went to Manpower and got a ticket and went across the street and worked somewhere for 45 years. And my life hasn't been like that. I've been a journalist. I've been a political hack. I've been a broadcaster and a station manager of a radio station. And, now that I'm a little bit older, I'm a novelist and a short story writer as well. And so all the things I've done, I think, contribute to me being a better writer at this point. And I look back when I picked up these manuscripts, and I could see when I was, I don't want to say a kid, but when I was a lot younger, I could see how I was looking for help. And of course, I'm still looking for help. Everybody needs a good editor. And fortunately, we've got a fabulous one at Run Amok, Krista Winsheimer. And, and certainly Joey and AB here helped me out quite a bit. But I would, like I said, I wouldn't change anything. I think that, I needed, my game needed some work, and that's what it comes down to. My game needed some work, and it was great that I was recording all this stuff and having experiences, but I needed some finesse, and I think I have that now.
Well, let's put Joey and AB on a spot here. When you two read the book, what was your initial reaction? And you got to be truthful now because he's right here in front of us. AB, let's start with you since you're in the future. By the way, he's like 14 hours ahead of everybody right now.
It's Saturday for him. Yeah, he's from the future.
It's 10:20 Saturday morning down here. Well, first reaction, I absolutely loved it. I think I came to it fairly late in the piece, and Vern had asked me to do a blurb for the novel. And I think based on my professional background, which is both a detective and a corruption investigator, so the subject matter was right up my alley.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that I write crime and fiction myself, but and yeah, the two things that really stood out and made it special for me were firstly the absolute realistic depiction of corruption and the insidious effect it has on everybody in the society, because there's not really anybody in that novel who's clean.
Thank you.
In some way, there's something going down for everyone. And I think that very accurately shows that there's very little black and white in this in our societies. And I don't think, I think Canada, the US, Australia, I think they're all fairly similar in that regard. So the corruption side of it was fascinating. Obviously, not having any experience of Canada and Toronto, some of that was very interesting because it was new to me, obviously. And some of the delightful little, did you pronounce it Quebecois phrases, the avec mocking, all those lovely little French words that are thrown in there were great. But look, the second part that really struck me as superb was Vern's depiction of those police characters, because a lot of crime that I read a lot of crime fiction, but all too often you see some very artificial or stereotyped depictions of cops.
Yeah.
Which to me, sort of having been there and worked in the streets, albeit a long time ago now, you pick up on those things straight away. But as I said to Vern when I gave him my blurb, the police personalities and the dialogue and the banter between them, I thought was just bang on. Notwithstanding they're Canadians and I've come from an Australian background, but from the whole police culture bit, that really worked for me. So I think it was excellent.
So you think they have more of an authentic feel than what some of the stereotypes out there that you see a lot of other stories?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've read a couple of local crime authors here who I never name an author when I say something a little bit negative. But
just tell us who you're talking about.
Give us the initials, at least.
They're very successful, but then I've read them and the depictions of the police characters, you think, no, that simply doesn't work. And look, for a lot of readers, they're probably never going to pick up on that. But no, I think, and obviously, whilst I said in my blurb that for somebody who hasn't worked in law enforcement, I think Vern's probably done the best depiction I've seen. Obviously, you've being a journalist back in the day, you've mixed with the law enforcement. I remember it from the other side of the coin, drinking with the journos. So very, very interesting times back in the 80s and 90s. But I think it's a brilliant depiction of them. And look, I'd love to read them again. In fact, it was a pleasure when I got this one after I'd read the manuscript, So that's the gimmick on screen now. And then, of course, suddenly rediscovered the two characters in there, which is great.
So you kind of went backwards to
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Joey, what was your impression of this? Vern, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Before I get out of order, I just wanted to, mention one thing about AP's going through it, AB Patterson going through it. I was initially a little bit concerned about sharing it with an actual cop because I was afraid, right?
Start picking things out for you,
right, and I gave it to AB to do a blurb, and he ended up doing a pretty big assist as far as I'm concerned. I'm a stickler for accuracy in Canada. If you're a journalist and push comes to shove, you have to be able to prove your story. And it's not like that in the United States. You just have to believe it's true, which is very, very convenient. But it is a very important thing to me. And there's a gun in the story. The chief weapon in the story, as you guys know, is a Zippo. And in part, that's because in Canada we've got strict gun control. It's not to say guns don't get in, but when Canadians absolutely positively have to neutralize somebody, sometimes that means they have to be creative. And so anyways, there was a couple extra guns in the story. One of them was a Smith & Wesson Model 10, and it's a revolver. And I'd actually done some research. I called Toronto police and emailed them and asked them questions about the specs of their cars, weapons, things like that. But, again, being a Canadian, I don't have a lot of experience shooting guns. And, and I've got somebody flicking on and off the safety on the Smith & Wesson Model 10, and there's no safety on revolvers. And, this to me, this was a key assist. And, AB sent me a very sensitive note beyond that. And I was extremely grateful. And, something we found about 2 weeks before publication. And, so it just goes to show, you do need help, and, you do need people looking at your work and correcting you on occasion. And AB, that was a key assist. And I'm so grateful for that. These things are important to me, and I really appreciate that.
It was an absolute pleasure, mate.
Thank you.
And like most people probably wouldn't catch that, but for the sticklers for details, like you, Vern, that's probably something that would stick out. If you was out and didn't catch it, like, oh man, I can't believe I did that.
I would know it's there. I would know it's there, and eventually
you'll find the one gun enthusiast that's in Canada that's right now.
Yeah,
you're that guy. It's like, okay, no, writing the hate letter to you. Well, if you would have done your research, you would have known. I can see it now. So
well, it's it's you get it as right as you can, and I'm very grateful that we got that part right. And I just wanted to mention that before we moved on.
Yeah, Joey was going to tell us when he read it, his take on everything.
Well, I'll just speak to the quality of the writing. I really like I've admired this in Vern's writing for a while now. The way when you read his books, and it's like especially this one, you can see the bones of his influences, like hardboiled detective fiction, but it never feels like hackneyed in the way that sometimes that does. And if anybody needs an introduction to the book, just read the first chapter. I don't want to give too much away here, but that Zippo Vern was referring to makes an appearance, and the whole thing is just quietly brutal in a way that I found very unsettling the first time I read the book. I actually read that first chapter, and I put it down for a while because, like I said, it was very quietly brutal. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace. But that kind of tone kind of plays out throughout the entire novel. And that's one thing that I really admire about Vern's writing.
Well, thank you. One thing I just want to jump in here as well. Joey read the manuscript years ago. This would have been about 3 years ago. It would have been about 2020 when I was sort of just coming around the mountain on the book, and I was getting towards the end, and I got into a rabbit hole. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, about details such as eye color and things along those lines. And I really was on the verge of doing too much. And, my younger self, would have just like kept banging the keys and trying to work it out and probably making things worse. And fortunately, I had the wherewithal to sort of say to myself, okay, you need to back away from the keyboard and think about this and, call somebody before you make it worse. Right. And Joey and I published, and this is sort of how we met. Joey and I had published short stories in Bull at that time. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the stories that made it into Joey's book. I've always been here before. What was the name of the story, Joey? I'm sorry.
The story's called No Harm at All.
Right. Correct. And I'd read Joey's story, and Joey was not in trouble in any of the areas that I was concerned about, and had dealt with all those very well. And I it's a while back now. I don't remember our conversation verbatim, but he generously spent a great deal of time on the phone with me, and we talked through it. And I felt after I got off the phone with him that, I knew what I was doing, or sort of thought I knew what I was doing. And, went in and sort of did the surgery and finished up the book. And again, very grateful to have been able to draw on Joey's expertise as an author and as an educator. And, got to the point where I felt I could finish the book, and I did finish it, obviously. And, again, a key assist, and you do need to reach out to the right people and get the right kind of help. And I got that from both Joey and AB.
I like remember you called me wanting to know more about how to do good physical description, which I thought was an odd choice to call me, because it seems like I don't do a whole lot of it.
Well, but I think that was the key, is not to get bogged down in that.
I like how you're comparing your older self with your younger self. It's called wisdom. Over the years, is wisdom.
Those gray hairs you got there, right, Jay?
The young. They just won't know what the old know. It's always that old saying. What would you go back and tell your younger self? You probably heard that before. Like, this is a perfect example, because your younger self, you would have just been gone crazy with it. Now, finishing it all these years later, you can slow it down. You can figure out the right path for everything. So, it's a key point right here. I think Brad's the younger of the group here.
Probably. I'm like 23. No, I'm just. But Joey, you were talking about the first chapter of the book, and I wanted to mention something that I had never heard of in the first chapter, and that was necklacing, which is a form of like torture, execution. Is that something you were already familiar with, Vern, or something that you did research for? It's like, oh, this is a cool method to, dispose of this person. Let's add this in.
Well, it was something that was going on in the world a fair bit at that time when I started the book. One of my things I used to do in terms of my process, and I'm just getting back into it. We're going back to the day where, there were a lot of physical newspapers and magazines. Mm-hmm. And I go to my coffee shop every day, which is in the book, and the jet fuel. And I would, gather up the papers. I would, read the papers or whatever fascinated me from the papers. And I would cut things out and put them in a scrapbook. And there were a lot of articles throughout the world on necklacing at that point. And I did want to get away. It wasn't an ethical or moral concern. but I wanted to get away from a little bit from the use of guns. And it wasn't
Okay.
to say I didn't want guns included in the story, but you know, there's a lot of novels, and I'm guilty of this too. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but there's a lot of stories that end in a shootout, and that's fine. I'm not, you know, I'm not banging a drum on that and being critical, but you know, I said, you're in Canada. There's got to be another way to do this, and you know, necklacing. We have all the, you know, tools of production in terms of necklacing. We have tires, we have gas, we have Zippos, right? And so it was something that was easy and quick, and there wasn't a whole lot of tech to it. And I thought, okay, well, that, you know, that can be their sort of modus operandi.
So for those that don't know, in the chat, explain what necklacing is real quick, just so they get that good mental picture of how
Okay,
horrible this
well,
will be.
basically they soak a tire in gas and they fit it around your shoulders and they light it
brutal.
on fire.
Yeah, it'd be horrible.
Like when I read that part, the first I was like, "Oh, this is setting the tone for sure." It was just
Yeah.
nice. Gary, when he brought this to you and you read it, was there anything that you were questioning because you were about to release it with Run Amok? I mean, were you like, okay, do you want to go that brutal that time, that right in the beginning there? Or, you know, were there terms that he was bringing in that you had to question yourself?
No, I implicitly trust Vern's judgment. I mean,
Careful.
it is brutal, but I mean, Vern has a way of tempering things with. I know he doesn't like necessarily want to be thought of as a comedic writer, and he is not. But he has a lot of funny moments, and I feel like it kind of offsets some of the brutality of that. But the one thing I did want to say about Vern and his novels, and they're all the same in that the plots are meticulously laid out. I mean, Vern is, you know, we're talking about how he's very detail oriented. His plots are that way as well. They're meticulously laid out. The cultural references, the pop cultural references are you know, all over the place, and half of them you'll get, half of them you won't. You know, but they're great. They're so colorful. So I think that those kind of things tend to sort of offset that sheer brutality that you know, that necklacing is.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I had not heard of that before. So
No, I had either. I had to look it up. I was like, oh, that's really bad.
That's bad. Yeah, that's basically my reaction. Ooh, that's bad. That would hurt.
More of this. It's bad, but more of this. Keep it
But I
coming.
did like that instead of, you know, just opposed to, you know, they pull it out again and they shot the guy. You know,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that happens all the time, and that can be, you know, boring and mundane after a while. But something different like that, something I had never heard of, so that's
Yeah.
pretty brutal. I like throwing that in,
Right.
Yeah,
and that being like a calling card sort of as well, was really cool.
yeah. And what was the saying, Vern? With mocking of
Avec mocking.
avec mocking.
He wanted to murder avec mocking.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny.
So
I
for
mean,
those
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That kind of
Yeah.
that little bit of humor that sort of offsets it, and you know, that's what I like about it.
There is
For
a
those,
question here in the chat.
Yeah, I
Jay,
was gonna
you want
say,
to go ahead?
jump. Which one is it?
One from earlier. Can Vern talk more about the racism within Canadians from Quebec to British Columbia? Because that plays out a little bit in the book as well.
Well, I don't think it's I don't think it's you know, so much British Columbia. It's traditionally is between Quebec and the rest of Canada.
Everybody else.
And
Quebec and everybody else.
yeah, well, the thing is, and you know, it's I get I'm not Quebecois, obviously, you know, but I spent a lot of time in Quebec and Montreal in particular, and you know, as an outsider, I think sort of became a little bit more familiar with some of the intricacies of Quebec culture. And, you know, Quebec I was having a conversation with recently with Tia Genet, the Pulitzer nominated playwright in Chicago, just down the street from me here. And I was talking about Quebec culture, and you know, she sort of laughed at me and said, you know, Quebec doesn't have its own culture, and that's the argument. That's the argument that has been within Canada my whole life. And you know, to me, Quebec is kind of a country within a country, and that's what a lot of Quebecers think of it. And you know, so I think there was always a feeling when I was growing up, you know, sort of felt like the rest of Canada was encroaching on Quebec. And so they've done a lot of things to quote unquote protect their culture, which I often don't agree with, but on some level I understand. And they have Quebec only sign or French only signs. And so, you know, I understand it on one hand. On the other hand, it's pretty ridiculous to me that Vietnamese restaurant would have to have a French sign, you know, or something along those lines. But you know, there's and there are things like if you move to Quebec and if you're an immigrant and you know, your children have to go to a French school, whereas if you're born there, they can go anywhere they want. And so a lot of these things have created some conflict with the rest of the country, and for the longest time, it was us and them. And Quebec's also it's a province that was, you know, for a long time was under the thumb of the Catholic Church. And so there's not really much sympathy for religion there, regardless of what your religion is. You know, you can be, you know, you can have a history of cocaine and still be the premier or the governor, you know, but they don't want you showing up in a priest's collar or anything else for that matter. And so I think it's sort of graduated to the point where it's not so much between Quebec and the rest of Canada at some point, although that remains. I think there's a lot of friction now in that it's a more multicultural society. And, you know, to a certain extent, I shouldn't say to a certain extent, to a large extent, you know, again, they're feeling Quebecois are feeling encroached upon by someone else at this point. So, you know, they're not so mad at the rest of us, you know. But it's the type of thing. There are people I know. Somebody very close to me used to go on ski trips to Quebec, and we're from Windsor, which is right across the river from Detroit. And you know, if this gentleman met a woman in Quebec, he would say he was from Detroit, so he wouldn't catch hell for being a Canadian who didn't speak Dutch, you know. And that's another part of it. That's another part of it. We're a bilingual country, and I mean, if I was in a life or death situation or needed to find where Jim Morrison's gravesite was, I could, you know, sort of hack and fake my way through it.
Right.
Ooh, Jim Morrison, you know, and which was my experience when I went to Paris, you know.
Jim Morrison,
you know, and we're trying to find his burial site, you know, and so it's like that. It's always been like that. You know, there's been a lot of threats of separation and votes to separate, which the separatists, I think, have always lost, if I'm correct, or mostly lost anyways, because they're still there. But there's certainly there's always been a tension there, and a certain stridency there, where, in terms of British Columbia, things are more laid back and everything is permissible. And, in Quebec, not everything is permissible.
And I think also one thing in the book too, Vern, that comes out is that they really have a culture unto their own. Their own music, their own movies. There's a lot that even outside of Quebec and Canada, people don't know about Quebecois culture.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and they, it's a province that supports their arts in a major way. There are movies that are made that are, for the most part, never shown outside of Quebec, and now we're getting into something else. But the Parisians think that the French Canadians speak a very quote unquote provincial version of French.
Yeah.
And and so there's not even an appreciation between Quebec and Paris that there should be, although there is, there are some ties between the two. But yeah, you have movies that are top-notch movies that are made in Quebec that are never really shown out of the province. You have literature that for the most part is a Quebec phenomenon, and I love it there, and I love old Montreal, and I have a lot of I have a lot of fond memories of Quebec, but there's always been something between Quebec and the rest of Canada, or Quebec and the rest of whoever's coming to Canada, and it's because they see their culture as fragile, and will do anything to protect it, even some things that, like I said, while I understand and try to understand, I can't always agree with them.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting to see that it's that extreme, because I mean, I've heard bits and pieces about it before, but I mean, here in the States, we have our own issues too. Trust me. So
Yeah.
I know.
Those issues kind of overshadow everything else. But I think we've been told bits and pieces of that story before. And I just didn't realize it was that extreme. And it's just, from an outsider looking at it, I'm wondering, what's going on. But then I see what's happening in the States here. So we could kind of relate a little bit, but go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, did you feel it important to add sort of those aspects in just for the authenticity of the story? And it's not like something you're just hammering on the whole time, but it's bits and pieces here and there throughout.
Well, I think, to a certain extent, it may not look like it, but I do, a lot of my writing is stream of consciousness. And so it's stuff that occurs to me in the moment when I'm on a roll. But certainly I wanted to demonstrate the differences between the two cultures, the tensions between the two cultures, and the differences between the two cultures. And we've got a Hell's Angel in there, Jean Max, from Quebec, and that's also a big part of our culture. I think biker culture has sort of been brought to heel in the last 10, 15 years. But at that point, the biker wars in Quebec were just over the top. And, while there were biker wars in Ontario and elsewhere in Canada, Quebec was sort of the epicenter of it. And so it was something, it was, I always say that the story is where everybody else is not. And I'm sure I'm missing something, but I don't recall being aware of a lot of fiction depicting Quebecois bikers. And so, I looked at that, and it's not like, I was the first, but it was again, it was something that the story is where everyone else is not, and nobody seemed to be on that part of the story, and so that was something I grabbed for myself.
So are the Hells Angels pretty prevalent in Canada? Because I didn't know that they were.
Yes, and I at least they were, like I said, and Joseph S. Pete has a great story in Jacked about the biker wars here, and it's they're sort of at the end of the line, in terms of pulling a lot of nickel and dime stuff, and I think at this point, that's where we are in Canada as well. But like I said, if you go back 10, 15 years, 20 years, the biker wars were pretty extreme, particularly in Quebec, and there was a lot of, there was a lot of obvious sort of, audacious stuff going on in regards to that. So it was easy to pull from.
For those who's joining us, we have a handful of new people in the chat. Of course, we're celebrating the release of Scratching the Flint. Tomorrow it hits the world. It's night, what better way to celebrate than, let's chat with the author and his special guest. Vern, before we get too far into this, do you want to maybe hop in and do your reading for it? Sure. and get things moving along with that?
Sure. And I'm going to give you a very brief reading. It's about a page and a half, and we'll give you an introduction to Cecil. And at this point in the book, Cecil and his partner Alex have been not suspended, but kinda, and they've been sent home for the week. And so Cecil's a little pissed off to begin with, but I think this will give you a good idea of how Cecil does business and his style of policing. Again, they've just been, unofficially suspended. Alex was so upset, like there was no way he was going to church tonight in this state, that he refused to drive Cecil home. No problem. Cecil was used to hoofing it. From the Eaton Center, he walked to St. Jamestown, Parliament Street, picked up a case of Keith's at the beer store. On the way out, he saw one of those fancy pants cars, a flamboyant station wagon, probably from Operation Cooperation, pull into a handicap space near the door. The car had wheelchair vanity plates, Mohican. Yep, this was one of the defrauders. Cecil couldn't recall every detail, but he specifically remembered vanity wheelchair plates on an old-fangled wagon. And talk about disrespect. The bespectacled dumpling inside swung his door open like he didn't have a care, walking breezily towards Cecil in an ironic Bigfoot t-shirt. Apparently, Bigfoot had seen this adult male, whoever he was, probably another legend in his own mind. I'd get back in my car, I was you. Cecil held his case with both hands, chin nodding across the lot, and park it in a natural walking man spot. What? The guy pointed at his bumper. I've got wheelchair plates. Trouble is, you're a natural walking man. Tilting his head, the guy maintained eye contact, looking at Cecil through utilitarian dark frame glasses. So what's it to you? That did it. Cecil took a half dozen steps and slammed his case on the hood, turning, listening to a few bars of the guy complain about what that was going to do to his sea blue paint. Had to be ordered special. Cecil flashed his shield, saying, "Whoa up," when the guy dared take a step forward. Sorry, officer. He held his hands high. I didn't realize, nodding to his plates. And I know how it looks, but I have a right to that space. How's that? Bringing his hands down, the guy said, I have an invisible illness. Invisible illness, my ass. Let's see your license. Come on, the guy said. Cecil waved at himself until the guy produced his wallet, removing his driver's permit. Cecil took it, looking at the guy's name, Gervais Garrett. Cecil couldn't see as how a dumpling in a Sasquatch shirt had anything to do with Doyle's demise, but memorized the pertinent info anyway, handing the license back. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Chin nodding across the lot again. Now I'm telling you, park that ancient piece of shit, probably gets a kilometer to the gallon, in a natural walking man spot before I bust you for being a fraudulently acquiring cripple plates ratbag. There's no fraud, Gervais said. My paperwork checks out. But you don't, Cecil pointed at the guy. Now move it. Cecil followed Gervais, who stepped into his wagon, keying the ignition. Cecil retrieved his case of Keith's, watching Gervais back out and park in a natural walking man spot.
Nice.
Nice.
Passion there. I like it.
I just want to say that the descriptor there, bespectacled dumpling, is a good example of what we were talking about earlier, with dialing back on the physical description to get with less is more.
Right.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Vern.
Well, I was just going to say they were fun characters to deal with, and you know, this is all set in the neighborhood I lived in Toronto on Bleecker Street. I was in a co-op on Bleecker Street, and Cecil, where Cecil lives, is probably about 100 yards down the street in one of the townhouses there. And so this neighborhood, and we talk about it in the book, St. Jamestown, it's one of the most densely populated. It is the most densely populated neighborhood in Canada. And, people living on top of people, we're all crammed. It's too small of a space, and we're pissing each other off. And so a lot of this stuff happened from things I was seeing and experiencing at the time. And so it was easy to dial that in because we're all feeling the same thing. And we're in a space. I mean, it gets hot during the summer. Everybody just goes crazy wild because we're all on top of each other, and the morning of 9/11, I got my only jaywalking ticket. I went out to get cat food and ran across the street on a red light. And so whenever anything was going on in the city or the world, and it was hot and the temperature, other than the heat, things sort of got turned up and keyed up, and you'd have all that stimuli. And there were a lot of things happening. It was a great place to write crime fiction. And there's not a whole lot of Canadian crime fiction that I'm aware of that's set in and around St. Jamestown and Cabbagetown. Hugh Garner had done some in the 60s and 70s that I'm very fond of, The Sin Sniper being one of those novels. But it was just a natural place to set a crime story, and police headquarters is not too far away. And so that worked out nicely. But yeah, it was just a really rich neighborhood for that way. And there was in terms of, it wasn't the most crime ridden part of Toronto, but we had about 17 halfway houses. So there was a lot of activity there, and it was a community that really worked into the story very naturally.
Well, I think your reading got a couple of people in chat here pretty interested in checking it out. Should we try a little contest? Maybe get a copy out to someone?
Sure. Well, we've got what I'm doing here for the contests is I'm giving away one of my earlier books along with a copy of Scratching the Flint. But you have to answer a skill testing question.
Oh boy. Nobody told me there was going to be a test. Come on.
Oh, come on. Just giving it away. You got to work for it a little bit. So
make people sweat. Let's do this.
So the Green Ghetto is set in Detroit. So I have a Detroit question. 1984 World Series was played in Detroit. And so how many people attended the 1984 World Series, and what were their names and addresses?
Nice.
All of them.
Okay. So that's going to be a little bit too hard.
I do want to say something real quick for the giveaway. Is it international shipping, U.S. only?
I'll do international. I'll do
Okay.
international. Okay, so this is something people can cheat on. Who is Detroit's most famous burlesque performer? The most famous burlesque performer to come out of Detroit, a female burlesque dancer, and you should be able to Google that anyway.
I was going to say everybody's hitting their Google right now.
Yeah.
So first person to put that in the chat can win a copy of The Green Ghetto and the brand new
Scratching the Flint.
We should play some
Jeopardy music.
Let's
We'll
play
get
some
copy-
music.
We'll get copyrighted and taken down.
Yeah.
So repeat the question for everybody again, Vern.
Who is the most famous burlesque dancer to come out of Detroit?
So I'm going to Google it too.
Well, we need the Jeopardy music.
Is it Kwame Brown? Is that correct?
No.
That's not who I found.
Okay, well, this is gonna do people. James says no. Google. Okay, Articulate Mattis. She's got it. Lottie the Body.
Lottie the Body. Okay.
And Lottie the Body is mentioned in the Green Ghetto, and so that'll be going out to. It looks like Tia Genet, the aforementioned Pulitzer nominee from Chicago. So I can save on postage there.
Yeah, you lucked out there, didn't you?
Just walk it over.
Yeah, just meet at one of the coffee shops and just hand it off. There you go.
So I do want to say, at least in America, there's sort of the stereotype about Canada, and me and Jay have a friend that lives in Canada where everyone's really nice, everyone's very apologetic all the time. There's no fighting or anything like that. So what is the importance for you of presenting Canadian crime fiction out to people, to let people know that it's not just everyone's all nice and lovey-dovey and saying they're sorry all the time in Canada, which is sort of the stereotype in America a bit about how Canadians are.
Well, the first part's true. I mean, I apologize all the time. I've got no business apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry. And so we do that. We say a lot and, a lot and things like that. And there is less crime, and part of the reason for that is we do have strict gun control. And, another reason for that is we address some of the causes of crime through, socioeconomic issues, through healthcare and other social safety nets. But the notion that there's not crime or violence is, sort of an inaccurate stereotype. It's there is less of it. Right. But in my hometown, Windsor, there was a killing when I was living there pre-2016. Wasn't far from where I lived, actually, in Little Italy. And they grabbed some guy, they took him into the garage. They obviously didn't have guns. They burned him to death, and then they put his carcass in the trunk and dumped him in a farmer's field in the county. When I was living in Toronto, right on Bleecker Street, the street where Cecil lives in Scratching the Flint, we had a situation where there was a nightclub across the street, and residents in my building were complaining of gunfire and got in touch with the police and the local city councilor, and they said no, people are just setting off firecrackers, right? And it couldn't have been after we got that answer 3 days later, and there were 3 people executed coming out of that club.
Wow.
Over a 3 or 4 day stretch. And we have big festivals in Toronto, and inevitably somebody's son or daughter doesn't come home, and they wound up being found in Lake Ontario 2 weeks later or something like that. So, and certainly Cabbagetown, where I was living in Toronto, Cabbagetown, St. Jamestown,
Mhm.
we have a little bit of a discussion on the disputed geography between that. And I've had people, I've had someone on the way to dinner at my house get mugged.
Really?
When I lived in Kensington Market, we had people over for dinner, and they went downstairs, and somebody was shot at the karaoke and crawling out on the sidewalk. And this was the damnedest thing. There were a lot of karaokes in Toronto, and there were a lot of shootings at karaokes. And you know what? It's over exactly what you think it's about. Somebody's making fun of somebody singing. Somebody goes out to the car, comes back with a gun, and blam, I've been mugged in my hometown of Windsor. When I was 15, I was mugged. And so, the notion that there's no crime or very little crime is incorrect, but it is dwarfed from what's going on in American cities. I live about 20, 25 minutes outside of Chicago, and there are 1,000 people, 800 to 1,000 people a year dying of gunshot wounds.
Right.
And so, there's certainly an imbalance, and I'm sure you look at the two, and Toronto, looks like great shakes, but on a lot of levels, as the aforementioned Tia Genet says, Toronto's just as effed up as Chicago.
Is there a large crime fiction community for Canadian authors writing Canadian crime fiction, or is it not as much as we would think?
It's probably not as much as we would think. Part of the reason for that is I would say about 90% of all fiction published in Canada is granted. And so it sounds great. And certainly the grant system in Canada doesn't owe me anything. I've been very fortunate to get funding there on more than one occasion, and I am thankful for that. But the thing you have to understand is when you accept money from the government to write something, that's going to change what you write. And
probably.
and because you want more, right? And that's the thing. And so now you're writing for the government on a certain level, and that does play out, and that's why there's certain stuff that's not going to get granted, and that's why we have pimps, but we have no literary answer to Iceberg Slim or Donald Goines. And it's not to say that those characters aren't there or those writers aren't there. It's that they're not popular in a government funded system. And so, there are great Canadian books, and there are writers in Canada who are extremely important to me as a reader. Evelyn Lau's early work I went and seen her read about 3 times. I adore her early work. Crad Kolodny, who Evelyn Lau and Crad Kolodny didn't get along, but I love him too. And there's a ton of great stuff that's been there, but it's uneven, and there are a lot of holes in terms of things we don't have an answer to. And the crime fiction scene is certainly smaller, and it's like here, it's very politically charged, but there's not a lot of opportunities. And you'll see with the Arthur Ellis Awards, or whatever they're calling them now, that most of the, or I shouldn't say most of, that's not correct. A lot of the awards won by Canadian writers, have come from publishing in American publications. And it's if you're a crime writer, it's a small country. It's a small country, other than the big cities. Geographically, it's very big, but there's just not that many people, and it's just not the same number of opportunities. And it's sort of one of the reasons why we're here. If everything was perfect in Canada, we wouldn't have left. But there are a lot more opportunities for us here. And I didn't come for the opportunities. I came for love, but my love came for the opportunities. And so I figure while I'm here, I may as well, make the most of these opportunities that aren't at home.
I was just wondering, when you were talking about the crime in Canada, and you said someone got mugged on their way to your place for dinner. Did they apologize for being late when they got there?
They actually did. Because they were really late.
Yeah.
Typical Canadian.
Yeah.
They had to go home and change and everything. But they actually did. It's my friend Garth from Toronto.
So as we start winding down a little bit, Gary, I want to ask you, this book's coming out tomorrow. What are some of the outlets people can pick it up? From Run Amok directly, or Amazon, or is it going to be in some bookstores? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, you can get it from any online vendor. Our distributor is Ingram, so any online vendor. Some bookstores may have it, but you can certainly order it if they don't have it.
Okay.
You can get it through Walmart, which blew my mind.
Yeah,
Really? That's cool.
You can get it through pretty much anywhere you want. We like IndieBound and bookshop.org, but because they're but Amazon, of course, it's there. And we would strongly encourage you to go to your local bookstore and order it through them, but that's up to you.
Okay. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Vern, I'm almost done with it. I didn't get to the very end. I didn't want to. So I'm glad you didn't give any kind of like major spoilers. So.
Everyone dies at the end, Jay. It's all over.
The butler did it. But thanks again for the whole panel, and Vern for asking us, and Gary for asking us if we want to put together a little something for you for this book release. So hopefully everyone in the chat, I'm sure they're going to go out and get, and people watching this tomorrow, the next day, they'll pick it up. So again, thank you very much. Joey, thanks for stopping by. AB, thanks for stopping by. Really appreciate it. It's like your own support group here. You should just make your rounds now.
I need one.
To all the late night talk shows, just bring your posse with you. So.
Yeah, especially in this country.
Thanks to you guys, Brad and Jay. We appreciate it. We appreciate the support.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, that's what we do.
More than anything, thank you very much. The editorial process is very taxing on me, and we've just finished that. And so it's nice to just have some fun with something. It was a lot of fun having a drink with you guys tonight. Yeah. And I, 2023, this is basically a night out for me. So so thank you very much, and thank you all.
Our buddy Chad Lutsky's here.
So we got to start over.
Start over and do this.
Every time he comes in,
thing.
we have to start over for Chad.
Yeah. So
Chad,
that's going to do it. Scratching the Flint tomorrow. It hits the world.
Pick it up.
It should be on your let's buy this list.
Some premier, not just crime fiction, but Canadian crime fiction. Get yourself a copy.
Gary, this is under the Run Amok Crime section, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Run
Amok Crime.
Yep.
For our panel here, thanks so much for stopping by. Everyone in the chat, thank you for stopping by. And we have a winner in the chat, so Vern will take care of that. Congratulations. That's going to do it, Brad. That's a pretty nice release party, right?
Vern, do you have any party words, friend?
Well, you're putting me on the spot. Obviously, I want people to read the book, and that's why we write them. And this is something that helps us get word out there in terms of creating awareness about the book. But mostly, like I said, it's when I write a book, I have a lot of fun with it, and I want the people to read it, to enjoy themselves as well. And but it's also important that I have a nice night out every once in a while. And this has been a really nice night. So thank you to all 5 of you. I really do appreciate it, and we will see you out there.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate
Bye-bye.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Those for you, man.
folks. We'll
See you next time. See ya.
Take care.
Jay, I love you, man.
I know you do.